with Conrad Thompson speaking to Ric Flair about contracts during the Jim Crockett Promotions era. Basically, Rick talks about how Tully Blanchard and Arn Anderson basically did not show up to an event, did a no-show, and Ric Flair basically boycotted as well. And he even admits it put himself at risk being the NWA World Champion at the time, of course. And basically, it all stems to Lex Luger, as you see here. And Ric Flair goes into detail, claiming that Lex Luger was very intelligent, had this basically mastermind plan to get this contract. But when you hear Lex Luger speak upon it, it was basically on a whim. How he was at a gym in Las Vegas with Nikita Koloff. He ran into Vince McMahon with his friends, and they just chatted for 5 minutes. Nothing to do with contracts. But word got back to the office of Jim Crockett Promotions, and there was this talk, how are we going to lock in Lex Luger so he doesn't go into the WWF, based on that visual of Lex Luger talking to Vince McMahon. And it's pretty hilarious how it all went down. You'll hear Rick talk about the Road Warriors, basically getting these larger contracts based on Lex Luger's contract that basically happened, again, on a whim. But things that happened, such as Paul Ellering, just a manager for the Road Warriors, getting more money than Arn Anderson and others in the Jim Crockett Promotions, what set a lot of people off. But basically, it all snowballed from this contract that Lex Luger received. And it was all based on the assumption that Lex Luger and Vince McMahon were talking about a contract to go to the WWF, when it had nothing to do with that. It was just a chance meeting, the two saying hello, and it blew up to where you had this whole contract given to Lex Luger, a 3-year contract for what Lex Luger says approximately $350,000, over paranoia by people within Jim Crockett Promotions. Let's take a listen to what Ric Flair has to say, then we'll listen to what Lex Luger has to say. Clears the air based on what happened back in the mid-'80s regarding his contract with Jim Crockett Promotions.
You're saying where Arn said it was difficult to be your friend in WCW, but it also probably paid dividends. I mean, I think when the whole...
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying it didn't. I mean, I quit one time with Jimmy Crockett. When those guys refused to go to Raleigh, I said, hey, they're not going, I'm not going. And that's a big step when you're the world champion. That's right. Rolling the dice. They could have said, screw you, Rick, right?
Right.
And I don't know what the resolve was, but it all basically started when they signed Luger to that huge contract. You know, the guy had just coming on board, unproven, and getting that huge contract, that just threw everything out of whack. And then the Road Warriors got a big contract, and then I wanted one, and it snowballed. You know what I mean?
Why do you think Luger got that big contract? Is it because he
had played pro football,
right?
And he knew how to negotiate.
When I had a chance meeting with we happened to be in Vegas at the same time as Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon was working out with a couple of his guys in the gym that me and a couple other guys went to. And Nikita Koloff was in there. He was like one of Dusty's best buddies. Time and Dusty was the booker, Rhodes for Crockett. And all I did was talk to Vince McMahon. Came up to me, introduced himself, and we talked for about 5 minutes at the gym. And said maybe someday in the future we'll do business, and I'm keeping an eye on you. And that was it. And within a day after we got back that weekend from Vegas, they called me in the office in Charlotte here and said, what do you want? I'm like, well, what do you mean, what do I want? They go, how much do you expect to make here? I'm like, well, I don't really have an expectation. I don't know what Ric Flair made, what Dusty made, what any of these guys make. So I go, I don't know. We had an expectation of us. I said, why don't I'm going to make a long story short here, but we went back and forth a little bit on what I wanted. I didn't want to commit to a figure because I had no idea what wrestlers are really paid, top wrestlers. And I wanted, of course, to be a top wrestler, but I told him I did want to hope to be fortunate to be a top guy. And if I am, I hope to be paid accordingly to what the other guys, no more, but I hope to be paid accordingly to the other guys. So he goes, well, how much would that take? And I said, gosh, can I talk to an attorney or somebody and get back to you? So we met a week later. I walked in and I didn't know at that time there weren't any tires other than minimum guarantees. So he asked me what I wanted, and I told him, and And he said, and he goes, okay. I was like, or you're like, gosh, I've asked for more. You know, you're like, it was good. I mean, for the time, it was a great figure. You know, I mean, I never made that money because they went out of business. But I mean, I never got that money because they were going to pay me out a lump sum at the end of the year if my money based on the house shows didn't meet my contract. So there was a little hitch to it. But I was the first guy ever to get any type of, like, I think it was a 3-year guaranteed contract or something for, I forget what it was, $350,000 a year or something, which back then was a huge, there weren't any guarantees other than a minimum if you got hurt of like $75,000 in case, so you could pay your rent and your mortgage in case you got hurt and couldn't work, you know, because if you get hurt back then, you don't get paid, you know, and there weren't such thing as a guarantee. So I didn't know I was getting involved in such a monumental movement. And wrestling now contracts are like football and basketball and everything else are part of the business. But I just kind of bumbled into it just by them seeing me talking to Vince McMahon and thinking, oh, Vince McMahon is going to steal him. I was under contract with the Crockett's at the time. I was just working for him, you know, which is standard fare back then. So they wanted to lock me into a contract. So I asked for a figure and they gave it to me. So that's how that came about. And then I get heat for it. And I go from Tully and guys were mad at me and who's making that guarantees making twice as much as he's guaranteed twice as much as I'm making. I'm like, well, I'm thinking to myself, well, geesh. I mean, if they offered you that, would you turn it down? I mean, put yourself in my shoes. Am I supposed to say no? You know, so I asked for it and they gave it to me. So, I mean, I didn't understand why I had heat for it, you know, because I think coming from football, it can only be a good thing for the rest of the guys, which it ended up being. As I'm sure the guys might have guarantees like Hogan or something. I'm not saying I'm like the initiator or creator of guaranteed deals, but I mean, it was unusual back then. It really was. And I just kind of stumbled my way into it, to be honest with you.